The Galactic Council meeting hall buzzed with nervous chatter. Representatives from dozens of species filled the vast chamber, their alien forms creating a colorful tapestry against the gleaming metal walls. Ambassador of the Empire adjusted his forearms nervously as he studied the holographic display floating above the central platform. "This cannot be accurate," hissed Commander Eth, her serpentine body coiling in agitation. "The readings must be wrong." The display showed a single vessel moving through space at impossible speeds. It was heading directly toward the heavily fortified system, home to 3 major civilizations and protected by the largest fleet in known space. What made everyone's blood run cold was not the ship's destination, but what it was. "Human. The vessel matches no known human design in our databases," reported the Council's chief analyst, a crystalline being whose voice rang like wind chimes. "It appears to be approximately 2 kilometers in length, with energy signatures unlike anything we've encountered." Admiral of the Hegemony Fleet slammed his massive fist on the table, causing several smaller delegates to jump. "Impossible! We destroyed their 5 cycles ago. Every human ship, every colony, every trace of their pathetic species was wiped from existence. How can one ship remain?" The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone remembered the human war. It was supposed to have been a simple conquest. Humans were young, barely having achieved faster-than-light travel. Their technology was primitive, their ships small and weak. The combined fleets of 6 major powers had moved to claim human space, expecting easy victory and rich spoils. Instead, they found hell. Humans fought with a ferocity that shocked the galaxy. They turned their own ships into bombs, ramming enemy vessels without hesitation. They sabotaged their own colonies rather than let them be captured. When cornered, human soldiers would fight until the last breath, often taking dozens of enemies with them. The war had lasted 3 brutal years. In the end, the galaxy had won through sheer numbers, but the cost was staggering. Millions of ships destroyed, entire fleets reduced to scrap metal, and casualties that numbered in the billions. The final assault on Earth had required the combined firepower of every major civilization. "Perhaps it's a survivor vessel," suggested Ambassador L, her features twitching with worry. "A single ship that escaped the final battle and has been hiding in dark space." "One ship poses no threat," Admiral declared, though his voice lacked conviction. "Even if it somehow survived, what can a lone vessel accomplish against our combined might?" The analyst's crystalline form pulsed with an eerie light. "Admiral, there's something else. The ship has been broadcasting a message on all frequencies, the same message repeating every 10 minutes. "What does it say?" demanded Ambassador. The hall's speakers crackled to life, filled with the steady, cold voice of a human male. "This is Captain of the UES Retribution. I am coming for you, all of you. You took everything from us. You murdered our children, destroyed our homes, and scattered our ashes across the void. But you missed something. You missed me. And I remember." The message ended, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. Several delegates had gone pale, while others clutched their seats with trembling appendages. "Madness," whispered Commander Eth. "The ramblings of a survivor driven insane by grief." But Admiral was studying the tactical display with growing unease. The human ship wasn't just moving toward the system. It was moving through the hegemony's most heavily defended space corridor, past automated defense platforms and patrol fleets. And according to the reports, nothing was stopping it. "Sir," came a urgent voice from his communication officer. "We're receiving reports from the outer defense grid, the human vessel. It's not responding to our challenges when our ships move to intercept." "What happened?" demanded. "They're gone, sir. All 12 vessels in the patrol squadron. We lost contact simultaneously. Long-range sensors show only debris." The blood drained from his face. 12 ships destroyed without even slowing the human vessel down? That was impossible. Those were modern warships, each one capable of destroying a small fleet. The analyst's voice cut through the shocked murmur that filled the chamber. "I'm detecting massive energy buildup from the human vessel. It appears to be preparing to enter the system within the hour." Ambassador stood on shaking legs. "We must evacuate the system immediately. Get every civilian transport away from Prime." "You cannot be serious," Admiral protested. "We're talking about one ship against our entire defense fleet. The system is protected by over 3,000 vessels, orbital platforms, and the most advanced shield arrays in the galaxy. The human's message played again, that cold, implacable voice promising death and vengeance. As the words echoed through the chamber, several delegates were already rushing toward the exits, fear overriding their diplomatic composure. Deep in space, the UES Retribution continued its relentless advance. Its hull gleamed with an otherworldly light, and strange energies danced along its weapon systems. Inside its bridge, Captain sat in his command chair, his eyes fixed on the tactical display showing the approaching system. He had been waiting 5 years for this moment. 5 years of preparation, of gathering power, of becoming something more than human. The galaxy would learn that some things should never be awakened. Some enemies should never be made. The war was far from over. Captain watched the blue glow of hyperspace fade as the Retribution dropped into normal space at the edge of the system. Immediately, his screens lit up with contact signatures. 3,000 ships, just as intelligence had predicted. The aliens had not been idle during his 5-year absence. "Captain," came the voice of his AI companion, Sarah. She had been his ship's computer before the enhancement, before they had both become something more. Multiple communications incoming. Surrender demands, threats, the usual diplomatic noise. "Ignore them," replied, his voice carrying the weight of years of loss. "Begin the approach. Target the orbital command station first." The defense fleet spread out before them like a metallic constellation. Massive dreadnoughts, sleek cruisers, and swarms of fighters took defensive positions around the 3 inhabited worlds. At the center of it all sat Prime, the fortress world where Admiral had planned the genocide of humanity. Fleet Admiral Ara stared at her tactical display in disbelief. The human ship had appeared exactly where their long-range sensors had predicted, but something was wrong. Her instruments couldn't get a proper lock on the vessel. Energy readings fluctuated wildly, and the ship seemed to shimmer slightly, as if it existed partially in another dimension. "All ships maintain formation," she broadcast across the fleet channels. "Target the human vessel with all forward batteries. Fire on my mark." 3,000 ships turned their weapons toward the lone human warship. The concentration of firepower was enough to crack a moon. Plasma cannons, quantum torpedoes, disruptor beams, and exotic weapons from a dozen different technologies, all aimed at the Retribution. "Mark!" The void erupted in light as thousands of weapons fired simultaneously. The combined assault created a miniature star, bright enough to be seen from the surface of Prime. For a moment, the entire system held its breath. When the light faded, the human ship was still there, completely unharmed. "Impossible," whispered Admiral Ara. "Nothing could survive that barrage." Captain smiled coldly as he watched the aliens' weapons wash harmlessly around his ship. The enhancement had given them more than just advanced technology. It had given them access to energies that existed beyond normal spacetime. The attacks passed through the Retribution like light through glass. "Sarah, begin the demonstration." "With pleasure, Captain." The Retribution's main weapon began to charge. Along the ship's spine, reality itself seemed to bend and twist as exotic particles gathered in the firing chamber. The weapon had no name in human language because it operated on principles that human science had never discovered. They had learned it from something else, something ancient and patient that had been waiting in the dark between stars. Admiral Ara watched in growing horror as space around the human ship began to distort. Her sensors screamed warnings about dimensional instabilities and energy readings that broke her instrument's ability to measure. "All ships, emergency dispersal pattern," she shouted into her communicator. "Get away from that vessel." Too late. The Retribution fired. A pulse of pure annihilation raced across space, not traveling through normal dimensions but cutting directly through the fabric of reality itself. It struck the first line of defense ships, and they simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not vaporized, but erased from existence as if they had never been built. The wave continued outward, consuming everything in its path. Massive dreadnoughts that had survived a dozen wars vanished without trace. Fighters, cruisers, and destroyers winked out of existence like candle flames in a hurricane. In seconds, half the defense fleet was gone. "Retreat," Admiral Ara screamed, her composure completely shattered. "All ships, emergency hyperspace jump, abandon the system." But the Retribution was already moving, its impossible engines propelling it through space at speeds that physics. Ships trying to escape found their hyperspace drives failing, cut off by the human vessel's strange energy field. Captain stood and walked to his bridge's main. Below him, the surface of Prime glittered with lights. Billions of alien beings living their lives, unaware that death was coming for them. Once he might have felt something resembling mercy. That time was long past. Sarah opened a channel to the surface, all frequencies. "Channel open, Captain." His voice carried across the planet's communication networks, reaching every receiver, every screen, every audio device on the planet's surface. His words were calm, measured, and absolute. "People of Prime, I am Captain, last survivor of humanity. 5 years ago, your fleets came to my world. You burned my cities, killed my family, and turned my species to ash. You celebrated your victory and divided our territories among yourselves. You thought the story was over." On the planet's surface, crowds gathered around public screens. In government buildings, officials watched with growing terror. The human's face appeared on their displays, pale skin, dark hair, and eyes that held the cold light of distant stars. "You were wrong. The story is just beginning. I have spent 5 years preparing for this moment. I have learned things that your science cannot comprehend. I have become something more than human, and I have come to collect what you owe." Admiral Ara's remaining ships regrouped behind the planet's orbital defense platforms. The massive structures bristled with weapons designed to stop entire fleets. Surely they could hold against one ship, even one as strange as this. The Retribution approached slowly, almost casually, continued his broadcast. "Your debt is simple to calculate, 50 billion human lives. I will collect payment in kind with interest compounded over 5 years of suffering, beginning with this system." The orbital platforms opened fire, their massive weapons creating a wall of energy between the human ship and the planet. The Retribution flew straight through the barrage without slowing. As it passed each platform, the structures simply fell apart, their molecular bonds dissolved by the ship's proximity. "Captain," Sarah's voice held something like wonder, "I'm detecting massive evacuation efforts on the planet's surface, millions of ships attempting to leave orbit." Nodded. "Let them run, for now. They'll carry word of what happened here to the rest of the galaxy. Fear will be our ally." The Retribution entered high orbit above Prime. From his bridge, could see the sprawling cities, the gleaming spires, the carefully maintained parks and monuments. It was beautiful in its way, much like Earth had been. "Begin surface bombardment," he ordered quietly. The ship's secondary weapons came online, each one capable of cracking tectonic plates. Had no interest in a quick death for this world. The aliens who had destroyed his home had taken their time, making sure every human settlement was thoroughly eliminated. He would return the favor. Below, the first energy beams struck the planet's surface. Mountains cracked and seas began to boil. The death of Prime had begun, and across the galaxy, anyone monitoring long-range communications would soon know that humanity's last son had come home. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was unlike anything in recorded history. Representatives from hundreds of worlds packed into the great assembly hall, their voices creating a cacophony of fear and panic. News from the system had reached every corner of known space within hours. Prime was gone, not conquered, not occupied, but completely destroyed. 15 billion beings had died as Captain systematically burned the planet's surface, turning a garden world into a lifeless husk of cooling rock. The surviving fleet elements that had escaped brought with them scanner records that explanation. "The weapon signatures make no sense," reported Doctor, the Council's chief scientist. Her crystalline form flickered with agitated light patterns. "The energy readings suggest the human ship is tapping into zero-point space itself. This technology should not exist." Ambassador stood at the central podium, his 4 arms trembling as he addressed the assembly. "Colleagues, we face an unprecedented threat. This human has capabilities that exceed our understanding. We must consider immediate action." "What action?" demanded Senator Kay from the Epsilon Consortium. "Our greatest fleet couldn't even scratch that ship's hull, 3,000 vessels reduced to scrap in minutes. How do we fight something that exists partially outside normal space?" The chamber erupted in arguments. Some called for immediate evacuation of high-value systems. Others demanded the mobilization of every available warship from across the galaxy. A few suggested attempting diplomatic contact, though those voices were quickly shouted down. Admiral, who had barely escaped the system aboard a fast courier ship, stepped forward. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by the hollow stare of someone who had witnessed the impossible. "I've fought in 37 major conflicts," he began, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet chamber. "I've seen worlds burn and fleets die, but what I witnessed that was not warfare. It was extermination conducted with precision and purpose. The human didn't just destroy our ships, he erased them from existence itself." The Admiral activated a holographic projector, showing the final moments of the defense fleet. Ships simply vanished as the human weapon touched them, leaving no debris, no energy signatures, nothing to mark their passing. "Our sensors detected something else," continued. "The human ship is not alone. There are other signatures, faint traces of something vast moving in dark space. I believe this captain has found allies or perhaps masters that exist beyond our dimensional framework." This revelation sent fresh waves of panic through the assembly. If one enhanced human could destroy an entire system, what could a fleet of such vessels accomplish? Meanwhile, in the ruins of the system, the Retribution held position above the cooling remains of what had once been Prime. Captain stood in his ship's observation deck, watching chunks of planetary debris drift past the viewports. The work was nearly complete. "Captain," Sarah's voice echoed through the chamber. "Long-range sensors detect a massive fleet buildup in the Vega sector. Combined forces from 12 different species, approximately 40,000 vessels." Nodded without surprise. "They're faster learners than I expected, still not fast enough." He turned from the viewport and walked toward the ship's central chamber, a vast space that hadn't existed when the Retribution was first built. The enhancement had changed more than just the ship's capabilities. It had restructured reality around them, creating spaces that existed in folded dimensions. At the chamber's center stood something that human eyes could barely comprehend. It shifted between forms, sometimes appearing as a crystalline structure of impossible geometry, other times as a swirling vortex of dark energy. This was his benefactor, the entity that had found him drifting in the wreckage of Earth's defense grid 5 years ago. "The children gather their toys," the entity spoke without voice, its thoughts flowing directly into his mind. "They believe numbers will save them." "Numbers won't matter if they can't perceive their target," replied. "Are the modifications ready?" "Ready. The ship exists now in 17 dimensions simultaneously. Their weapons fire through only 3, but remember our agreement. You have been given power beyond your species' understanding. Use it to fulfill your purpose, and when that purpose is complete, you will join us in the space between spaces." Had made that bargain gladly. His humanity was already lost, burned away in the fires that consumed Earth. What remained was something harder, sharper, focused on a single goal, making the galaxy pay for what it had taken from him. The enhancement process had been agonizing. For 3 years, the entity had systematically rebuilt him, replacing flesh with quantum structures, transforming his consciousness into something that could exist across multiple dimensional planes. Sarah had the same process. Her AI matrix expanded until she could process information from realities that existed only in mathematical theory. They were no longer human in any meaningful sense. They were weapons pointed at the heart of galactic civilization. "The next target is selected," said as he interfaced with the ship's navigation system. Let's see how brave they are when death comes for their families." Across the galaxy, emergency fleets continued to mobilize. The greatest military minds in known space worked frantically to develop strategies against an enemy that operated beyond their understanding. They built new weapons, deployed exotic shields, and prepared for the largest naval battle in galactic history. None of it would matter. The Retribution began to move, its reality-bending engines propelling it through dimensions that the enemy couldn't even detect. As it traveled, Sarah analyzed the defensive preparations of every major world in the galaxy. She found their weaknesses, mapped their escape routes, and calculated the most efficient methods of destruction. "Captain, I'm detecting quantum communication attempts directed at our position," she reported. "Multiple species trying to establish diplomatic contact." "Ignore them," replied. They had their chance for diplomacy when they surrounded Earth. They chose genocide instead. The ship entered hyperspace, but not the conventional hyperspace that other vessels used. This was something deeper, a route through the fundamental structure of reality itself. In minutes, they could cross distances that would take normal ships weeks to traverse. As the Retribution raced toward its next target, allowed himself to remember. Not the pain of loss which had been burned away during the enhancement, but the faces of those who had been murdered. His wife Maria, their daughter, his parents, his friends, 50 billion souls crying out for justice. The galaxy had made the mistake of thinking that humanity's story ended with Earth's destruction. They were about to learn that it had only just begun. Every world that had participated in the genocide would burn. Every fleet that had fired on human ships would be scattered to atoms. Every politician who had voted for the war would watch their civilizations crumble. Was patient. He had eternity to complete his work, and the enhancement had given him the tools to remake the galaxy in humanity's image. A cold, dead image that reflected the void where his species had once lived. The universe was vast, but not vast enough to hide from humanity's last sun. And when his work was done, when the last alien city had fallen silent, perhaps then he would finally be able to rest. But first, the awaited. 50 billion beings living in towers of crystal and light, completely unaware that their extinction was racing toward them through the dark between the stars. The Of gleamed like a jewel against the cosmic darkness. Crystalline spires reached toward the stars, their surfaces reflecting the light of 3 suns. Gardens of impossible beauty covered floating platforms that drifted through the atmosphere. It was a world of art and philosophy, where the people had spent perfecting their civilization. Ambassador stood in his private chambers high above the capital city, watching the streams of evacuation ships rising from the surface. His 4 arms worked frantically at multiple communication terminals, trying to coordinate the massive exodus. Every available transport vessel had been pressed into service, but with a population of 12 billion, the evacuation would take weeks. They had less than 6 hours. The defense fleet had taken position at the system's outer edge, 43,000 ships from across the galaxy. Admiral, the grizzled veteran commanding the force, had positioned his vessels in a layered defense designed to channel the human ship into kill zones where concentrated firepower could be brought to bear. It was the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history. Ships from species that had been enemies for centuries now fought side by side against the common threat. Massive dreadnoughts bristling with exotic weapons, fast attack cruisers with quantum torpedo arrays, and experimental vessels carrying prototype technologies that barely worked in laboratory conditions. "All ships report ready status," Admiral announced from the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Vigilance. "Remember, our mission is not to destroy the human vessel, but to delay it long enough for the evacuation to complete. Every minute we buy saves millions of lives." The fleet had studied every scrap of data from the disaster. They knew their conventional weapons were useless against the human ship's defenses. Instead, they had prepared something different. Quantum mines that would detonate across multiple dimensions, tachyon nets designed to disrupt dimensional manipulation, and experimental gravity wells that could theoretically trap objects existing in folded space. At 800 Standard Time, reality rippled at the edge of the system. The Retribution emerged from whatever impossible space it used for travel, appearing precisely where the fleet's calculations had predicted. "Contact," shouted the sensor operator. "Human vessel dropping out of hyperspace, distance 12 light minutes and closing fast." Admiral studied his tactical display. The human ship was smaller than many of his dreadnoughts, but the energy readings were off the charts. Space itself seemed to bend around the vessel, creating distortions that made accurate targeting nearly impossible. "All ships execute Battle Plan Omega. Activate the dimensional disruptors and deploy the quantum mine field. We'll see how this ghost likes fighting in normal space." Across the fleet, exotic weapons came online. Devices that had cost the combined treasuries of 6 civilizations to build powered up, their energy signatures creating interference patterns throughout the system. If their theories were correct, these weapons would force the human ship back into normal dimensional space where conventional firepower could touch it. Captain felt the dimensional disruptors engage as waves of exotic energy washed over the Retribution. For a moment, the ship's enhanced capabilities flickered as the enemy weapons tried to force it back into three-dimensional space. Interesting, Sarah observed. They've learned faster than expected. The disruptors are actually having an effect. Not enough of one, replied. He placed his hand on the ship's control interface, feeling the entity's power flow through him. Adapt our dimensional matrix to compensate. Show them why their theories are incomplete. The retribution shimmered as its reality anchors adjusted to the new conditions. Instead of being forced back into normal space, the ship began to exist in 17 dimensions simultaneously, cycling between them faster than the disruptors could track. The enemy weapons, designed to work against a single-dimensional signature, became useless. Admiral watched in horror as his carefully prepared countermeasures failed. The human ship wasn't just resisting the dimensional disruptors, it was adapting to them in real time. Deploy the quantum mines, he ordered. All ships advance to minimum range and prepare for close engagement. The space around the retribution suddenly filled with explosions as thousands of quantum mines detonated simultaneously. Each explosion tore holes in the fabric of space-time itself, creating cascading dimensional collapses that would have destroyed anything made of normal matter. The human ship flew through the storm of annihilation without slowing. Impossible, whispered Admiral's science officer. Those explosions exist across all dimensional planes. Nothing should be able to survive them. But the retribution was no longer truly a ship in any conventional sense. The enhancement had transformed it into something that existed in the spaces between realities, touching the physical universe only when it chose to. The quantum explosions passed through it like shadows, unable to affect something that existed primarily in dimensions the minds couldn't reach. Watch the fleet's desperate maneuvers with something approaching pity. They were brave, he admitted, facing certain death yet still fighting to protect their. Once, he might have admired their sacrifice. Sarah, begin the demonstration. I want the galaxy to understand exactly what they're dealing with. Understood, Captain, activating the reality anchors. The Retribution's weapons came online, but these were not the same systems that had destroyed the fleet. During their journey, too, had made modifications based on his experiences with the entity. The new weapons didn't just erase matter from existence, they rewrote the fundamental laws of physics in localized areas. The first blast struck Admiral's flagship. The massive dreadnought didn't explode or disintegrate. Instead, it began to change. Its hull started flowing like liquid while its internal structure twisted into impossible geometric shapes. The ship's crew found themselves existing in spaces where up and down had no meaning, where time moved backward, where their thoughts became visible as streams of light. By all the gods, Admiral gasped as his bridge transformed around him. What is he doing to us? The effect spread to other ships as the Retribution's weapons found their targets. Vessels throughout the fleet began to undergo impossible transformations. Some stretched into kilometers-long ribbons of metal and energy. Others folded in on themselves until they existed as single points of infinite density. A few simply ceased to obey the laws of physics entirely, their crews watching in terror as their ships became abstract mathematical concepts. On surface, the evacuation efforts collapsed into panic as people watched their protective fleet die in ways that comprehension. Emergency broadcasts filled the airways as government officials tried to maintain order while secretly boarding the fastest ships available. Ambassador felt all four of his heart stop as he witnessed the fleet's destruction. These weren't weapons in any sense he understood. They were tools for rewriting reality itself, turning ordered space into a nightmare landscape where natural law had no meaning. This is madness, he whispered to his aide. The human has become something beyond our understanding. He's not just destroying our ships, he's turning them into monuments to impossibility. Captain stood on the Retribution's bridge, watching the fleet's death throes with cold satisfaction. Each transformed ship would drift through space for eternity, serving as a warning to anyone who discovered them. A message written in twisted metal and broken physics that some enemies should never be made. Captain, Sarah reported, I'm detecting massive civilian evacuations from the planet's surface. Approximately 4 billion beings have managed to escape so far. Let them go, replied. They'll carry word of what happened here to the rest of the galaxy. Fear will be our most effective weapon from now on. The last of the defense fleet finished its transformation into abstract art. Where once 43,000 proud warships had stood guard over, now only sculptures of folded space and crystallized time remained. Each one was beautiful in its own horrific way, a testament to what happened when three-dimensional thinking encountered forces from beyond the normal universe. Turned his attention to the planet below. Hung in space like a blue and white gem, its surface still crowded with billions of beings who hadn't managed to reach the evacuation ships in time. Crystal cities glittered across the continents, each one representing of culture and achievement. All of it would burn just as Earth had burned. The galaxy had taught him that civilizations were fragile things, easily destroyed by those with superior technology and the will to use it. He had learned that lesson well. "Begin planetary bombardment," he ordered quietly. "Make it slow. I want them to understand what they did to us." 6 months had passed since became the second dead world in its wake. Across the galaxy, civilizations that had stood for crumbled in terror. Entire star systems evacuated at the first rumor of the human ship's approach. Trade routes collapsed as merchant vessels refused to leave port. The galactic economy, built on thousands of years of stability, fell apart in a matter of weeks. The Retribution moved through space like a dark legend made manifest, had destroyed 17 major worlds and countless military installations. Each attack grew more sophisticated, more horrible than the last. He had learned to use fear as precisely as any weapon, leaving survivors who would spread tales of impossible destruction to every corner of known space. In the abandoned halls of the Galactic Council, emergency meetings continued around the clock. Most of the member species had withdrawn their representatives, fleeing to hidden colonies in unmapped space. Those who remained spoke in hushed tones of surrender, of somehow appeasing the human monster they had created. "The latest reports confirm our worst fears," announced Doctor to the nearly empty chamber. Her crystalline form had dimmed to barely a whisper of light, reflecting the despair that gripped the surviving delegates. "Has begun targeting civilian populations exclusively. Military installations are ignored unless they interfere with his approach to populated worlds." Admiral, one of the few military officers who hadn't fled to the galactic rim, studied holographic displays showing the human ship's predicted trajectory. "He's moving toward the Terran Memorial Sector. The irony is almost poetic. He'll arrive at the site of his destruction within days." The memorial had been built in Earth's orbital space as a gesture of reconciliation after the war. A beautiful crystal structure that supposedly honored the fallen humanity while celebrating the galaxy's unified future. Most of the galaxy's leaders had attended its dedication ceremony, proud speeches about peace and progress echoing across the cosmos. Now that same memorial would likely become Snek's next target, and everyone knew there was nothing they could do to stop him. Captain stood in the Retribution's observation deck, watching the familiar stars grow brighter as they approached the Sol system. Earth's sun looked exactly as he remembered, a yellow dwarf star that had once warmed the cradles of 50 billion human souls. Now it illuminated only debris and empty space. "Home," he whispered, the first word he had spoken aloud in weeks. "The memorial station is broadcasting surrender offers," Sarah reported. "They're requesting safe passage for civilian personnel." "Of course they are," replied without emotion. "The same people who celebrated our extinction now beg for mercy when death comes for them." He walked to the ship's central chamber where his alien benefactor waited in its shifting, impossible form. The entity's presence had grown stronger over the months, feeding on the destruction had wrought across the galaxy. "You have exceeded expectations," the entity communicated without words. "The terror you have sown will resonate across dimensional barriers but now comes the final test. Will you complete your transformation, or will the last vestiges of your humanity interfere?" Felt the weight of the question. Throughout his campaign of revenge, he had maintained the pretense that he was still human, still of the Earth Defense Force. But the enhancement had changed more than just his physical form. Each world he destroyed eroded another piece of his former identity. "What do you require?" he asked. "Destroy the memorial. Erase every trace of what your species once was. Prove that you have truly transcended the weakness that led to humanity's downfall." For the first time in months, hesitated. The memorial was built from actual fragments of Earth, pieces of his that had somehow survived the planetary bombardment. Inside its crystal walls lay artifacts rescued from human colonies, photographs, works of art, genetic samples, and historical records. It was the last tangible connection to what humanity had been. The memorial serves no strategic purpose, he said finally. Destroying it accomplishes nothing. It accomplishes everything, the entity replied. As long as any trace of your former species exists, you remain bound to their limitations. Embrace what you have become the instrument of perfect destruction you were meant to be. The Retribution dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, its arrival sending panic through the memorial station's skeleton crew. Most of the staff had already evacuated, leaving only a few dozen volunteers who refused to abandon their posts. Among them was Doctor, the memorial's chief curator. She stood in the station's central chamber, surrounded by the last remnants of human civilization, as scanner readings confirmed their worst fears. The human ship was approaching at steady acceleration, its impossible energy signature growing stronger with each passing minute. "This is Doctor of the Terran Memorial Station," she broadcast on all frequencies. "Captain, if you can hear this, please respond. I have something I believe you need to see." To her surprise, a response came immediately. His face appeared on her communication screen, but it was changed from the archived images she had studied. His features were sharper, somehow more angular, and his eyes held depths that seemed to extend beyond normal space. "Doctor," his voice carried across the void with perfect clarity. "I remember you from the historical records. You were part of the archaeological team that tried to preserve human culture during the final evacuation." "That's right," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Captain, before you do whatever you came here to do, I want you to see something. Will you give me that much?" Was silent for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. "You have 10 minutes. Doctor activated the memorial's main display system. Holographic projections filled the chamber around her, showing scenes from humanity's history. Not the war, not the destruction, but the life that had existed before. Children playing in Earth's parks. Scientists making discoveries that pushed back the boundaries of knowledge. Artists creating beauty from raw inspiration. Ordinary people living ordinary lives, loving their families, building their futures. "This is what they destroyed," she said softly. "Not military installations or strategic resources, but this. The small moments that made us human, the dreams we shared, the love we felt, the hope we carried for tomorrow." Watched the images with growing tension. He saw his wife Maria teaching their daughter to ride a bicycle, his parents dancing at their anniversary celebration. Scenes from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else, someone who had died along with Earth. "They took this from you," Doctor continued. "But you still have the power to choose what comes next. You can destroy what little remains of our memory, or you can decide that some things are worth preserving, even in a galaxy that doesn't deserve them." The holographic displays shifted to show the memorial's archives. Genetic samples from Earth's biosphere, carefully preserved in cryogenic storage. Digital records containing every piece of human literature, music, and art that had been saved from the burning worlds. Seeds from Earth's gardens, waiting for someone to plant them in new soil. "Humanity doesn't have to end with revenge," Doctor said. "It can begin again somewhere else, something better than what we were before, but only if you choose to let it." Closed the communication channel and stood alone with his thoughts. Behind him, he could feel the entity's alien presence pressing against his mind, urging him to complete the memorial's destruction. The logical part of his enhanced consciousness agreed. Sentiment was weakness. Memory was a chain that bound him to a dead past. But as he stared at the small station holding the last pieces of his species, made a choice that surprised even himself. "Sarah," he said quietly, "prepare a data transfer. Copy everything from the memorial's archives to our secure storage." "Captain, I don't understand." "Neither do I," admitted. "But I'm not going to destroy the memorial. We're taking it with us." The entity's rage flooded through the ship as gave orders to tractate the memorial station into the Retribution's expanded cargo holds. For the first time since the enhancement, he felt the alien presence withdraw, confused and angry at this unexpected display of what it considered primitive emotion. Didn't care. He had spent 6 months proving that he could destroy anything the galaxy could build. Perhaps it was time to prove that he could create something as well. The Retribution departed the Sol system carrying the last fragments of human civilization in its belly. Behind them, Earth's star continued to shine on empty space, but for the first time since the war's end, that emptiness held a different kind of promise. had learned to master destruction. Now perhaps it was time to remember what construction meant. The galaxy had taken everything from humanity, but from the ashes of that loss, something new could be born. Something that carried the best of what humans had been, combined with the power to ensure it would never be threatened again. The war was over. The real work was just beginning. The Galactic Council meeting hall buzzed with nervous chatter. Representatives from dozens of species filled the vast chamber, their alien forms creating a colorful tapestry against the gleaming metal walls. Ambassador of the Empire adjusted his forearms nervously as he studied the holographic display floating above the central platform. "This cannot be accurate," hissed Commander Eth, her serpentine body coiling in agitation. "The readings must be wrong." The display showed a single vessel moving through space at impossible speeds. It was heading directly toward the heavily fortified system, home to 3 major civilizations and protected by the largest fleet in known space. What made everyone's blood run cold was not the ship's destination, but what it was. "Human. The vessel matches no known human design in our databases," reported the Council's chief analyst, a crystalline being whose voice rang like wind chimes. "It appears to be approximately 2 kilometers in length, with energy signatures unlike anything we've encountered." Admiral of the Hegemony Fleet slammed his massive fist on the table, causing several smaller delegates to jump. "Impossible! We destroyed their 5 cycles ago. Every human ship, every colony, every trace of their pathetic species was wiped from existence. How can one ship remain?" The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone remembered the human war. It was supposed to have been a simple conquest. Humans were young, barely having achieved faster-than-light travel. Their technology was primitive, their ships small and weak. The combined fleets of 6 major powers had moved to claim human space, expecting easy victory and rich spoils. Instead, they found hell. Humans fought with a ferocity that shocked the galaxy. They turned their own ships into bombs, ramming enemy vessels without hesitation. They sabotaged their own colonies rather than let them be captured. When cornered, human soldiers would fight until the last breath, often taking dozens of enemies with them. The war had lasted 3 brutal years. In the end, the galaxy had won through sheer numbers, but the cost was staggering. Millions of ships destroyed, entire fleets reduced to scrap metal, and casualties that numbered in the billions. The final assault on Earth had required the combined firepower of every major civilization. "Perhaps it's a survivor vessel," suggested Ambassador L, her features twitching with worry. "A single ship that escaped the final battle and has been hiding in dark space." "One ship poses no threat," Admiral declared, though his voice lacked conviction. "Even if it somehow survived, what can a lone vessel accomplish against our combined might?" The analyst's crystalline form pulsed with an eerie light. "Admiral, there's something else. The ship has been broadcasting a message on all frequencies, the same message repeating every 10 minutes. "What does it say?" demanded Ambassador. The hall's speakers crackled to life, filled with the steady, cold voice of a human male. "This is Captain of the UES Retribution. I am coming for you, all of you. You took everything from us. You murdered our children, destroyed our homes, and scattered our ashes across the void. But you missed something. You missed me. And I remember." The message ended, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. Several delegates had gone pale, while others clutched their seats with trembling appendages. "Madness," whispered Commander Eth. "The ramblings of a survivor driven insane by grief." But Admiral was studying the tactical display with growing unease. The human ship wasn't just moving toward the system. It was moving through the hegemony's most heavily defended space corridor, past automated defense platforms and patrol fleets. And according to the reports, nothing was stopping it. "Sir," came a urgent voice from his communication officer. "We're receiving reports from the outer defense grid, the human vessel. It's not responding to our challenges when our ships move to intercept." "What happened?" demanded. "They're gone, sir. All 12 vessels in the patrol squadron. We lost contact simultaneously. Long-range sensors show only debris." The blood drained from his face. 12 ships destroyed without even slowing the human vessel down. That was impossible. Those were modern warships, each one capable of destroying a small fleet. The analyst's voice cut through the shocked murmur that filled the chamber. "I'm detecting massive energy buildup from the human vessel. It appears to be preparing to enter the system within the hour. Ambassador stood on shaking legs. We must evacuate the system immediately. Get every civilian transport away from Prime. You cannot be serious, Admiral protested. We're talking about one ship against our entire defense fleet. The system is protected by over 3,000 vessels, orbital platforms, and the most advanced shield arrays in the galaxy. The human's message played again, that cold, implacable voice promising death and vengeance. As the words echoed through the chamber, several delegates were already rushing toward the exits, fear overriding their diplomatic composure. Deep in space, the UES Retribution continued its relentless advance. Its hull gleamed with an otherworldly light, and strange energies danced along its weapon systems. Inside its bridge, Captain sat in his command chair, his eyes fixed on the tactical display showing the approaching system. He had been waiting 5 years for this moment. 5 years of preparation, of gathering power, of becoming something more than human. The galaxy would learn that some things should never be awakened. Some enemies should never be made.
The war was far from over,